Good evening, everyone, and a mazel tov to all the Mesayimim of Maseches Pesachim on the Daf Yomi cycle. Mitzvah Hashem, you should be zeicher to finish the future Maseches and should go mechayel and choyel throughout Shas. Tonight, in the fact that we finished Maseches Pesachim and Pesach is coming around the corner, I was asked to review Halacha LMaaseh, a little bit about the subject that's discussed all the way in the first parak of the Masechta, and that's the mitzvah of Bedikas Chametz. Chazal were mesaken to us to the night before Erev Pesach. This year it's going to be the night before that, Thursday night, because of Shabbos coming in Erev Pesach. So we all know that there's a mitzvah to go ahead and spend some time going throughout the house and checking. First you clean, and then of course you check, making sure that there's absolutely no chametz available in the house. That's the mitzvah midrabanan that every family does before Pesach. The questions that we want to discuss tonight is, how extensive does that bedika have to be? How much time should a person really be spending on bedikas chametz? And we know there are famous stories about Gedolei Yisrael, various backgrounds that spend an enormous amount of time in probably what was a small little hut of an apartment of 2 bedrooms. And sometimes we hear stories that they spend a whole night checking and checking again and checking again, making sure that there's not even an iota, the smallest little particle of chametz, should not chas v'shalom remain in their houses. So there were chayshish for the Isser, Bar Yeroy, Bar Yematzeh. The Torah tells us chametz cannot be seen, chametz cannot be found in our rishus. And the Bedikas Chametz is there to make sure that there's absolutely nothing remaining. And many G'daylim, many families do go ahead and spend that kind of amount of time to be mekayim properly the mitzvah of Bedikas Chametz. It would come out that if you look at it from that angle, from that perspective, then we have to use the slogan of no corner or no even smallest area can be left behind. You would have to move the refrigerator, making sure to see that there's no crumbs, no pieces of chametz behind the refrigerator. Perhaps behind the oven, some crumbs fell throughout the entire year, especially in a busy household where there's little children who put in chametz in every possible corner that they could be. It's very appropriate, applicable to people have svarim, and svarim are used throughout the year, near and with chametz. And the Bedikas Chametz requires us to go ahead and open up all this farm that we use throughout the year, making sure that there's no chametz in there. We can understand why that could take an extensive amount of time for somebody to go ahead and spend all that energy and making sure there's no chametz around in any one of the pages in any of this farm that he used throughout the whole year. It's not just farm, it's HaRav Doniel's books that people read. The children read books and they have food with them sometimes when those books are being read to them or by them. There's so much toys. Our families, Baruch Hashem, the large families, people have dozens and dozens of toys throughout the house that there's chametz involved somehow. When the kids play, they eat, the chametz comes in, chametz goes out, and all that needs to be searched and cleaned and gone over and over and over again. And this could certainly take a lot of time. And that seems to be what a lot of people do, and a lot of people do put in that energy, that time required for all of that chametz to be cleaned and checked for them at Bedikas Chametz at night, and that really could take a whole night long. On the other hand, and this is what we would like to clarify, now that you've learned the Masechta, but all the way in the beginning of the Masechta, the Gemara seems to indicate, and we'll go over that Gemara, the Gemara seems to indicate that crumbs don't really matter. The Gemara says that crumbs are loy chashivi, they have no significance, they don't count, and we're not really worried about crumbs when it comes to the Isser, Bar Yeroy, Bar Yematzeh. So what is it? Are we concerned about crumbs? Do we have to go look for every little particle of chametz wherever it may be? Or crumbs really are something that we could just ignore? And perhaps even if the crumbs are staring you in the face. But if crumbs are insignificant, the crumbs don't matter, so then who cares? Why do we have to go spend our time, especially for people who don't have time? Not everybody's able to put in all that work and energy in order to making sure that the house is absolutely zero tolerance for any chametz whatsoever. Not always available for everybody to do that. So we need to discuss not just what people would like to do, or maybe people have been doing, but what does the halacha demand from us? What exactly is the minimum and maximum requirement for us to do when we do Bedikas Chametz and therefore clean our house. And we should add that this is a question for every year. This year it has a little bit of more of a practical application, because since Erev Pesach is on Shabbos, people are going to be leaving over some chametz at least for the first 2 meals, Friday night meal, Shabbos morning meal. There'll be chametz remaining, and chametz yields crumbs, especially families, people with children. There's going to be crumbs in the house, and that makes people very nervous and uneasy. A lot of anxiety. This results. Oh, wait, there's going to be a crumb remaining in my house. Well, is that a reason for anxiety or not? After all, if Purim don't count, so then you shouldn't be anxious about it. Do crumbs count? Do crumbs not count? This is something that is not so clear in halacha, and we'd like to clarify today and see the practical applications of it, how that really applies. Because after all, everything goes back to the Gemara that Baruch Hashem we just finished learning, and we need to make sure that the halacha coincides with the Gemara. So let's just remind ourselves about that Gemara, which is all the way back in Daf Vav. The Gemara over there discusses, we know that in addition to Bedikas Chametz, which is followed by Biur Chametz, in other words, it's a search and destroy mission. First we search for it and then we destroy. In addition to that aspect of getting rid of the Chametz, we also do Bitul Chametz. Kol Chamira v'Chamia, we make the declaration that any Chametz that we have in our Rishus should be null, should be void, should be hefker, should be considered worthless, and therefore a person then is not transgressing Bal Yeroi, Bal Yamatzeh, because it's not his. He gave up ownership, and even though technically it's there, but since it's not yours any longer and it has no value, you are mafker it, you consider it worthless, so the Bitul Chametz works. So the Gemara wants to know, if there's a process called Bitul Chametz that we do, so then why do we also have to get Bedikas Chametz? So what do we need to do? It's a double effort. Why is the Chazal came with 2 separate requirements for us? One to be mevatel the chametz, and then followed also by bedikas chametz. And the Gemara answers famously that the reason why we need to also do bedikas chametz in addition to the bitul is because shemi yimtza glus kana, a person could go ahead on Pesach, he did check, but he may find a big cookie, a nice, beautiful piece of donut that he actually wouldn't mind eating, and therefore he'd be over balamatzi because he found it there. So therefore, in order to make sure that you're not going to be over balamatzi in case you find the gluskana, so therefore there's a process called bitul that you have to be mevatel the chametz. That is what the Gemara answers. But the obvious question which the Gemara deals with is to go ahead and find the gluskana. It's not that common. How many times you're going to go find yourself a donut that remained around the house? It's not so shchiach, I would say. But crumbs is very shchiach. It's almost impossible, practically impossible, to actually get rid of the house of every last crumb possible that it could exist in the house. So why didn't the Gemara answer? Is very simple. The reason why we need to do bitul is because the bedika is not likely to yield every single crumb possible. It's very possible that some crumbs will remain, even if you do your very best job that you can. So for that reason, we should need bitul. That's why Chazal gave us this backup plan, because the Bedikas will likely not find every single possible crumb. On that, the Gemara says, no, because we're not worried about crumbs. Crumbs is not an issue. Crumbs, says the Gemara, that Perurin loy chashivi, they're not chashiv, they're insignificant, and the Rishonim explained, afar pishaloi bitlan, even though you didn't declare it kol chamir v'chamir, or b'kamoi batlihein, they're self-nullified. They're like kapadalai, people don't care about them. They have no chashivas by people. For baliroi balimatzeh to happen, it has to have some kind of a significance, some kind of an entity. If it's something which is insignificant by people, the Gemara indicates that is something which is bottle. Taisa says, bottle me'elav, it's self-nullified, kemoi perurin, just like crumbs have absolutely nothing, that they don't stand for anything, and therefore there's no concept of baliroi balimatzeh when it comes to perurin. And we have to explain the Gemara that even though generally in all of the isurim shebetoira, there's a concept called chatzi shir osur min ha-Torah. In other words, of course, to be over karis, you have to have a shir of a kazais, a piece less than a kazais. You're not going to be over the real isur midaraisa valiroi balamatzei, which is punishable by karis. But still, we paskin chatzi shir, even less than a shir, is also osur min ha-Torah. It's still an isur deraisa. But over here, the Gemara is telling us no. Bal Yeroy Bal Motzei, Chatzi Shir doesn't apply. And there's various ways in the Achronim to explain the lumdus of that. We can't get into that halacha shir today. But the bottom line is that the Gemara clearly indicates that when something is described as a crumb, it is considered insignificant, and it's not even Chatzi Shir. It's nothing. It has it doesn't have a chashivus. And something like that is as if it doesn't exist. It's loy nira, the loy nimtza. Even though you can see it, and it's there, but from halachic standpoint, it has absolutely no significance, and therefore crumbs are something which is permitted to be done. And we have to explain very clearly that the Gemara doesn't mean to say that the reason why crumbs are insignificant and don't constitute a problem of chametz is because it's inedible, or because it's moldy, or disgusting, or ma'abdim tzuras hachametz. No, that's not the discussion here. If it's moldy and inedible, then even if it's a big piece, it's not bali roa bali matzeh. That's something that you don't have to get rid of altogether if it's pasal nachilas kelev, or sometimes even pasal nachilas adam. But perurim, even they are edible, and a person would not necessarily shy away from it because it's something which is fresh and nice and appealing. But nevertheless, if it's perurim, there's no bali roa bali matzeh, because bali roa bali matzeh requires a certain significance. And if it's something which is halachically insignificant, it's kemisha enam. It's as if it doesn't exist, and therefore completely bottle. This is the concept that the Gemara brings down without a debate, without a machlokes. There are no two opinions about this. It's an absolutely agreed upon principle. Interestingly, Shulchan Aruch never brings up this concept straightforward. The Shulchan Aruch never addresses perurim in and of itself, whether that is something that we need to worry about. But the Magen Avram, in Simon Taf Lamed Daled, brings down this Gemara in one very simple line. Veda, he says, the perurim mimela batli, something which is called the crumbs, are bottled automatically on their own. Why do you have to be bitul for? So what do you need to declare kol chamir v'chamir? So he quotes the Gemara, Shema Yimtza Gluska Yefifia. Maybe you'll find a donut. Maybe you'll find something which is not a crumb, something which is appealing to you. And the Bedikas would have failed to discover that. So you need to have the bitul in order to make sure that you're not over bali roy bali motzei. So Magen Avram quotes the Gemara without fanfare, without a machlokes. It seems to be something which he understood. It's self-evident because the Gemara is self-evident. And the Magen Avram goes on to say, take a look in Shulchan Aruch, Siman Taf Samach Se'iv Gimel. And he just references you to that. So if you take a look, go ahead to that Shulchan Aruch over there in Siman Taf Samach. The Shulchan Aruch over there discusses the well-known custom many people have, a minig, that they bake matzahs on Erev Pesach after the Zman Isser, where you're no longer allowed to have chametz. At that time, they make matzahs mitzvah. A lot of people are noyeg to do that in the days of Chazal. Everybody did that. And the Shulchan Aruch says over there that somebody who needs a dough after the Zman of Isser Chametz on Erev Pesach, and he's making matzahs for Pesach, he should make a declaration at the time that he needs the dough that any crumb that will fall throughout the lisha, throughout the kneading process, or any remaining dough that will remain attached to the kalim, you have to make a pre-declaration. Ani mevatel oisam at shenimtza shemevatlem kalim chumutza. The Shulchan Aruch says you need to declare it null and void. This way it becomes batal before the chametz ever even has an opportunity to become chametz. That is what the Shulchan Aruch says in Siman Taf Samach. Asks the Magen Avram over there, why do you have to make that declaration? Why does the Shulchan Aruch require us to make that declaration before you need the matzah on Erev Pesach? All you're going to do is just cause crumbs. Crumbs? Memele batli. Didn't I say back in Taf Lamed Daled? Doesn't the Gemara say that crumbs are automatically just disappear? They don't count at all. They're insignificant. So why do we have to make a special declaration bepeh? So the Magen Avram over there in Taf Samach answers in the name of the Maril, and the Mishnah Berurah brings it down in the Sha'ar Tzion, that the reason why over there you need to make a declaration is because we're dealing with crumbs not of baked bread, but of dough. And dough crumbs are a problem because you could take all the little pieces of dough and combine them to make one big ball of dough, and that dough can have a share of a kazayis where you'll be over balirah balamotzeh. So since it's chazil it's tarufi, since it's possible for it to be combined and become one big piece, so over there we want to make sure that that's not going to happen. The remote chance of that happening, we want to avoid that as well. And therefore, for that type of a situation, you need to make a special declaration that you do not want that those pieces are considered bottle and that before they become chametz. However, when it comes to crumbs, which are already baked, and you can't put crumbs together because crumbs just don't go together, so therefore there's perurim. Perurim is bottle. If it's bottle, we have absolutely no worrisome about it. You don't have to be mevatel them. The kon chamir v'chamir doesn't apply to them because they're self-nullified, and we don't have to bechlal negate it. It's so insignificant. It plays absolutely no role. It would come out. Therefore, according to this very clear understanding of the Gemara and of the Pesachim, that it's not just that you don't have to go ahead and check for it by Bedikas Chametz. You don't have to go ahead and spend time looking here, looking there for any possible crumb that there might be, because we don't care about crumbs. But it will be even more. Even if a person knows, I happen to know that in that particular corner there's some crumbs remaining there because my little Yankala had a cupcake there a day before. I happen to know it's crumbs. But you know what? I don't have time to deal with it. It's a busy time before Pesach. I don't care about it. It's crumbs. Crumbs, the Gemara, I know the Gemara, I learned that for Yomi. Loi chashivi, it's bottle. And therefore, I don't even have to do, not only don't have to do Bedikas Chametz, but I won't even have to do Biur Chametz. I won't even have to go ahead and forget about the searching. Even if I know that it's there, I won't have to destroy it because there's no Bali Roy Bali Matzeh, so let it be there. What do I care? If it's insignificant enough not to be over Bali Roy Bali Matzeh, so therefore I don't have to bother to go ahead and get rid of it. And therefore, according to this understanding of the sugya, this year especially, when there may be crumbs on Shabbos Erev Pesach that the children have eaten in the house or chametz, whatever the case may be, and who cares? Who cares that there's crumbs over there? Crumbs? I'm not concerned about crumbs. You got to make sure there's no big pieces. But crumbs is something of insignificance, so therefore let there be crumbs. It doesn't seem to be bothering us at all. And indeed, the Pri Chodesh in Siman Taf Mem Daled, when discussing Erev Pesach Shechol Yes B'Shabbos, says clearly, even if there's going to be crumbs remaining from the chametz that you created on your house for the sudas of the Shabbos, don't worry about it. And even if you see them, don't even bother getting rid of them. It's Shabbos. Who says you got it? It might be muktzah at a certain point. Don't even get rid of them because it doesn't bother us. Because pirurim aloy chashiv batli, let the crumbs remain where they are. That seems to be the simple understanding of the Gemara and the Magen Avraham. But as we said before, people don't seem to subscribe to that. People take this halacha and they certainly would lose their mind and their sleep over the fact that they know that crumbs are remaining in their house, especially if they know that there's crumbs. They certainly wouldn't allow it to be there. But people do much more than that. They search and they search and they search some more to make sure that there's absolutely not a particle, as small as possible crumb remaining in their home. And the question is that required? Does the halacha require that? It's a good question. There are some indications from other poskim in the halacha that they were concerned about pirurim. There are other indications like that. For instance, the Ramah writes in Taf Lamed Gimel, where he discusses the chiyuv of Bedikas Chametz. The Ramah writes that there's a din that you have to check your pockets. Hakisim or batiyat shel begodim, the pockets that clothing have, sheneisnim bem lefal mechametz, which is an area that you put chametz in sometimes. Tzrichen bedika, they must be checked as part of your Bedikas Chametz process. And that's what the Ramah says. Doesn't say why. In the Sefer Chak Yaakov, which is a major Pesach in Hilchos Pesach, says the reason why you have to check the pockets is because there's crumbs. Very easy that your hands had some crumbs in them when you ate. You stuck your hands into your pocket. Those crumbs were transferred from your hands into the pocket, and because of that, you have to be chayshish. You have to do the parasha of Bedika. So according to this Chak Yaakov's explanation of the Ramah, he clearly was concerned about crumbs. But the question is, we don't know why. The Chak Yaakov certainly knew the Gemara, but nevertheless, the Chak Yaakov says that the Ramah means to say that one has to check pockets for crumbs, and we don't really, and that seems to be the minig. The minig follows that, but nevertheless, we don't have an explanation why this is so. And we also find many other sources that seem to indicate that crumbs could be a problem that one needs to do something about to make sure that there aren't. In the subject that we discussed before, on Erev Pesach this year, where crumbs may remain after the meal, so it's true, the Pri Chodesh says, don't worry about the crumbs, disregard them. But the Mishnah Berurah himself, although he mentions this Pri Chodesh, seems to take a more stringent view. And he says that after the meals of this Shabbos, you should shake the tablecloth down from the crumbs that may have come on there. And then he says, those crumbs that now are going to be on the floor, you don't have to bother really with them. Why, he says? Not because they're insignificant. He doesn't say that. He says, the nidrasen beraglayim umizbarim aleim. Because it's on the floor, so everybody's walking around. You're walking around, those crumbs will be self-destroyed. That's not self-nullified. Those are two different things. It's not because they're so insignificant that they don't matter. It seems that he holds it does matter. But there's another way of destroying them by the fact that people are walking on them, and the walking will destroy them by the fact by the traffic that takes place around the house. And he himself says that you shouldn't really rely on that either, but you should try to sweep. You need to sweep the floor. And even in those days that Mishnah was talking about, sweeping was a problem on Shabbos because the floors weren't paved and it was usher to do kibud habayis. She says, get a guy. A guy could sweep the floor for you. Nowadays, the Mishnah will just say that we should sweep the floor because nowadays you're allowed to sweep the floors on Shabbos. We see from the Mishnah Berurah that he was concerned but remaining crumbs in the house, where he suggests that either you destroy it with your feet or destroy it by sweeping, but he didn't just dismiss it out of hand and say, crumbs? Not an issue. It's absolutely not a problem. Even though he himself, in many places, quotes this Magen Avraham and says, Perurim, no problem. But here, in this particular halacha, he doesn't just disregard it altogether, and he seems to indicate that there is an issue of crumbs that we need to deal with. Truth is, everybody's familiar, of course, that we do Bedikas Chametz l'oyer haner. We do it to candle lighting. And the Gemara that we learned in the first parak of Pesachim says to us that the primary reason why we do oyer haner is because you need to search b'chayrin u'bizdaken. You need to search every nook and every cranny, every split, every crack, every place where chametz could have ended up. That is part of the Bedikas Chametz, and that's why we use a candle. It would seem, from the simple language of the Gemara and the Pesachim, what goes into a chayr, into a sedek, a hole in the wall or a crack in the floor? What goes in there? Not big pieces, only crumbs. That's what goes in there. And still, that seems to be the primary reason behind Bedikas Chametz. So that makes no sense. If Perurin don't count and they're nothing to be substantial about, so then why do we need to make Bedikas Chametz la'or haner to be used chayr nusdaken? It's possible to say that they're not talking about small little chayrin, small little nusdaken. As a matter of fact, maybe in those days they used to have these indentations in the walls where they actually used to put food down there, and therefore they were worried that maybe a big piece will remain. But nevertheless, the lashon of chayr and sedek is mashma that any size, anywhere that any chametz could have fallen, one needs to do something about, and you have to get rid of it. So the whole indication of the halacha does seem to say that we are concerned about perurim as people are, whereas the Gemara and the Pesachim who talk about this Gemara seem to dismiss perurim out of hand. So we have a disconnect a little bit in the halacha, what exactly is supposed to be our mindset when it comes to perurim as far as the Isser Baliroi Balimatzei. The truth is, if you take a look in the Ritva, in Pesachim Daf Zayin, he actually brings down that there's a machlekes of Rishonim about this. The Ritva brings down an interesting thing. He says, the G'dayle Hadar, he doesn't say who they are, but he calls them the G'dayle Hadar, so the Rishonim. He says they used to have a chumrah that on the 14th day of Nisan, before the Zman of Isser Chametz kicked in, they brought in a tarnagol, a chicken, a rooster, a hen. They brought it into the house so that the chickens should eat up all of the crumbs that are remaining in the home. This was an old-fashioned vacuum cleaner. They used to bring in the chickens, and the chickens ate up all of the perurim on the thing. That's what it brings down from the G'dayla Hadar. But the Ritva himself, after quoting the G'dayla Hadar, he mocks it. He says, "Ha vaday lav milsehi." This is absolutely nothing. The mishum perurim loichashevi. They brought in the chickens to pick up crumbs. Who cares about crumbs? Crumbs are loichashevi ubatli, and they're self-nullified. So what do we need to vacuum? What do we need to vacuum clean the floor for? All the vacuum cleaner does, by definition, only works on crumbs and dust. It doesn't work. That's not what we use it. It's not for big pieces. So therefore, it will come out that really that's the machlokes over here between the G'dayla Hadar and the Ritva. The G'dayla Hadar seem to have been worried about crumbs, where the Ritva says, why? The Gemara says that Purur Lechashivi. There's a problem over here that we don't understand. There's another Mishnah Berurah, in Simon Taf Mem Beis, who actually also seems to indicate that this issue of pieces which are smaller than kazais, which are called pirurin, is there a chiv beer? Do you have to destroy them or not? He seems to say nachluku b'zeh rishonim. He doesn't say which rishonim exactly, but he seems to say that there's a disagreement amongst the rishonim. Perhaps he means this mitzvah, whether or not pieces less than a kazais require to be destroyed or not. But the Mishnah Berurah says, even if you hold that pieces less than a kazais need to be destroyed, but that, he says, is only if they are appealing and appropriate for human consumption. But if they are metunafim, the translation of the word metunafim means they're dirty. They're not something that a person would really would appeal to another person, then don't worry about it. And this requires also an explanation. Why? If it doesn't say that it has to be posel machilas kelev, that's when you don't have to worry about it. Of course, for that you don't need perurun, any piece, like we said before. He seems to say that if it's less than a kazayis and therefore it's called a perurun, then it depends on how appealing it is. That seems to be the indication. So that's like a new factor that the Mishnah Berurah throws in here. But the truth is that in this Mishnah Berurah lies the key to the whole sugya. Because if you go through this, the sources properly, it's very clear that because of the Isser of Balirah Balamatze, as we said, and we brought from several sources, Perun are insignificant. They don't count, and you don't have to worry about it, and you're not over Balirah Balamatze, whether you get rid of it, whether you're mevatel it doesn't really make a difference. But there's another old issue here that has to be discussed, and that is, in addition to the Isser of Balirah Balamatze, that a person may not have chametz in his ownership and in his property over Pesach. There's another Isser that we're all familiar with, and that is a separate Isser, and that is the Isser of achilas chametz. One cannot eat chametz on Pesach, and on that Isser of achilas chametz, over there, chatzis shir is asur min haTorah. There's a distinction between the Isser of Balirah Balamatze, where chatzis shir is insignificant and doesn't count because it's not here. Whereas opposed to it, like any other Isser Achila Shabbatayra, one is not allowed to eat Chazer. You only over the Isser Deraisa and the Malchus if you eat a kazayis of it. But if you eat a half a kazayis of Chazer, or if you eat a smaller Chazer, so then you Chatzashir. It's Asam in HaTorah. You may not get the punishment, but it's still Asam in Deraisa. Same thing is true with the Isser Achila of Chametz. Even if you're not going to be over Baliroi Balamotze, which you are not, but nevertheless, if you're going to eat even a crumb of chametz, you're over the isser of lo ya'achel chametz, even though it's less than a shear. Chatz shear, Asam and HaTorah tells you that you cannot even eat an insignificant crumb of chametz. The word insignificant applies to the isser of baliroi balamatze. Over there, we're concerned with significance. But when it comes to achila, significance is a non-factor. It's you ate it, you consumed it, you ingested it. If it's in you, you had a piece of chametz in you, no matter how small. Even kol shehu is asur b'achilas chametz, and we are very, very nizer about that. And therefore, explain the poskim that the reason why we have to do bedikas chametz and we are concerned about crumbs is not because of balirah balamatze, because balirah balamatze is a non-factor; it's insignificant. But if crumbs will remain around the house and there will be available that they may come in contact with food inadvertently. Of course, you don't mean to eat those crumbs of chametz. But if you're going to leave a crumb, and if you know it, certainly if you know there's crumbs, but even if you don't know there's crumbs, but somehow those crumbs can come in contact with the chametz. You leave a crumb in the drawer. You take the spoon, the crumb attaches to the spoon, that crumb will make its way to your kashal Pesach yogurt that you're eating, but there might be a small, little, insignificant crumb in there. Balirah balamatze is not an issue, but achilas chametz is certainly an issue, and therefore you'll be over the issue of achilas chametz. Ken Chazal said that you need to search your home for perurin, not because of balirah balamatze, but because chas v'shalom, maybe that summer will end up in the food. Shema, yavai, la'oichloi, which according to some Rishonim, that's the whole concept of bedikas chametz. But today we're saying, certainly when it comes to small pieces like perurin, which we don't really care about balirah balamatze, and there's no argument about that, but nevertheless, oh yeah, so the Ramah says, you got to check your pockets. You know why you got to check your pockets? Not because if there might be a crumb in there, you'll be over balirah balamatze. We don't care about that. But yes, you may stick your hand into your pocket throughout Pesach, and you may happen to pass it by your mouth, and that crumb will end up in your mouth. You'll be over the Isser of Achilas Chametz Pachas Mikashir, which is agreed upon by all the Pesachim, is certainly Asur. Now we understand very well that the Mishnah Berurah said that when you have pieces of Chametz less than a kazais, you need to search and destroy them only if they're appealing, only if they're appropriate and fit for human consumption and people would maybe come to eat it. Then, and only then, you need to get rid of those pieces, because then Shem Yavel Eichloi is a distinct possibility. We want to protect the unassuming person from Chas v'Shalom being nichshel in the Issa B'chilas Chametz. Only if it's appealing, then inadvertently a person may forget, take it, this, that, end up in his chametz, then we're worried about it. But if it's metunif, if it's embedded somewhere in the crack in the floor, if it's somewhere that is not accessible to come with some food, if it's somewhere in the ceiling that is no shachet that will come to the food, we don't care about it. Because HaRav Doniel is not an issue, so why do I care that it's there? So it's there. It's not considered that it's there. But achila is altogether a different factor, and that has its own parameters. When it's possible for it to come to contact with achila, that's where we make sure to search and destroy any possible chametz. So that's why the Mishnah Berurah in Hilchos Erev Pesach Shechal B'Shabbos says, yeah, you're right. We're not really concerned, like the Pri Chadash says about crumbs, because crumbs is not a factor of Bali Rob Alamatzeh. But if you're going to leave crumbs around the house and they're might come into contact with food, well, that's a problem. So what does he say? No problem, because people step on them all over the place. And once they step on them, they're no longer appealing. They no longer come in contact with food, and therefore it's not an issue for us. Yeah, of course you should try to sweep it away, but not because of Bali Rob Alamatzeh. The reason is because of the chashash of Shema Yavai L'Oichloi. So now that we understand the halachic framework of what Bedikas Chametz is all about, so we understand that there's two kinds of Bedikas Chametzes. There's Bedikas Chametz for any big pieces that may have been remaining around the house. Maybe you forgot to clean a certain area, or maybe you didn't clean, and now comes and you see that there's Chametz over there. Of course, you need to do Bedikas Chametz. Bal Yeroi, Bal Yamatzah. You got to protect yourself from the Issa Deraisa. That's one style and type of Bedikas Chametz. But then there's another one. Looking in areas where it's possible for the chametz to come in contact with the food, kitchen areas, pantry areas, pockets, other such places around the house and around our area where somehow it's possible that a crumb will make its way in its food, that we have a mitzvah midrabanan to make sure to search and destroy that crumb, not because we're worried about Ba'irah Balamatzeh, but because we're very worried that food, that little crumb, can end up in our food. So now, when we understand this framework, we could go ahead and talk about all those issues that we began with. How much Bedikas Chametz a person has to do. So do you have to remove your refrigerator or your oven because there may be some crumbs of Chametz lying behind it? And the answer is no. You don't have to do so. Because there's no way that food could make it, those crumbs can make its way into our food. Shem Yavel Eichloi is not a factor when it comes to those kinds of perurim which are inaccessible. They're metunuf, like the Mishnah Berurah says, that are appealing to us, and they're not accessible to us. And some perurim which are not accessible to us, we don't care about. Bali Roy, Balamatzes are not an issue because they're insignificant. And Shem Yavel Eichloi is not applicable. So if both factors of Bedikas Chametz are not present, then Bedikas Chametz is not an issue. If you have a kind of an oven or refrigerator that is constantly being moved around, maybe one of these mini things that is not stationary and people move them around and it's mobile, then yeah, because then those crumbs will be accessible, perhaps. And therefore, even though the Bali Rob Alamatzeh still won't be an issue, but Shem Yavel Eichloi would be an issue. You got to get rid of both problems in order to make sure that Shem Yavel Eichloi is not, that neither one of those factors is a problem, and only then are you exempt from Bedikas Chametz according to the basic halacha. On the other hand, for instance, on your child's high chair, you need really to search even for the most minute crumb that may be somewhere embedded into the table or into the chair. And why is that? Because yes, even though we're not concerned about crumbs because of Ba'irah Balamatzeh, but it's very shaykh that the crumb will somehow fall into the food, make its way around the table where the child may take it out and put it into the adult food or his own food. So then Shem Yavel Eichloi is an issue. In those areas, crumbs do count, not because of Ba'irah Balamatzeh, but because we're worried about any factor, any food. any food and any crumb that may end up in our food. This applies as well to the well-known question about how extensively do you have to clean your car. People have cars. Cars are full of chametz. People eating them all year round. They want to use that car for Pesach. If you don't want to use the car for Pesach, you could just sell it and get rid of it that way. But if you want to use the car for Pesach, you have to do Bedikas chametz in the car. Now, how extensively? Do you need to go behind the seats? Do you need to go underneath the carpet? Do you have to spend who knows how much time making sure that the car is absolutely zero tolerance chametz free? The answer is, for Balirah, Balamatza purposes, you got to just check for big pieces. Anything which is considered a crumb, anything which is less than a kazais, certainly if it's metunaf, it is a non-issue whatsoever, and you can leave it in there. Shem Yavel Eichloi is a factor. So if there's crumbs, even small little crumbs, on the seat of the car, absolutely you must spend time getting rid of that. If there's crumbs in the where you put the keys in the or in one of those boxes that you have around the front seat where you put the coffee, whatever it is, of course that has to be cleaned really well. Those crumbs could chas v'shalom end up in your food, and that's the purpose of Bedikas chametz, to protect ourselves from that. But if those crumbs are behind the seat, underneath the carpet, inaccessible, unappealing, inappropriate for human consumption, not likely to come in contact with any food, doesn't bother us, because there's no Balirah and there's no Shem Evel Eichloi, and therefore those things are not a factor. Same principle would apply to Sfarim that we mentioned before. Now, Sfarim, sometimes people throughout the whole year open up a sefer, take out some chametz, and while they're engrossed in learning, they're eating as well, and very possible that crumbs will fall into the sefer. So you have to check all of your Sfarim for possible crumbs that may be in there. So let's see. They're not likely, almost impossible, for there to be a piece worth a size of a kazais remaining in a sefer. The sefer won't even close. So therefore, there are no pieces of kazais remaining in Sfarim throughout the entire, for Balirah Balamatze to be a problem. However, if there's crumbs remaining in there, Shem Yavel Eichloi could possibly be a problem because those crumbs might end up, might fall, inadvertently, you may actually put your finger on a crumb and bite into it when you're busy learning on Pesach without realizing that it's Pesach. It's possible Shem Evel Eichloi could be a little bit of a problem. So therefore, only the Sfarim that you'll be using on Pesach and that you have used before Pesach with Chametz, those Sfarim need to be checked. But all the other Sfarim that you have, you don't have to bother with them, because big pieces are not going to be there. Small pieces are Perurim. Balirah Balamatze is a non-issue. They're insignificant. They're batal me'elav, and you don't have to do anything about it. Shem Evel Eichloi, not a problem, because you're not planning to use those Sfarim on Pesach. So therefore, no reason to go ahead through the vast majority of the Sfarim that you used all year round. It's only the few Sfarim that you're planning to use on Pesach, and those few Sfarim were also used with Chametz throughout the year. Those Sfarim need to be checked for possible crumbs. And if you haven't used those crumbs, those Sfarim in months and months and months, and they're moldy or they're not appealing, they're inappropriate, or not fit for human consumption, that people won't come to eat them, then don't worry about it altogether, because those crumbs, there's no Shem Evel Eichloi, as we said before, those are considered metunuf, and therefore we're not concerned with that as well. Same thing applies to toys. Many people allow their children to use their toys with food. They have food there, they eat, and they play. So now it depends. If you're not going to be using those toys on Pesach, you want to just put them away, just put them away. Just look for any big piece, go through the toys, see if there's any significant pieces of chametz that may be there, and remove those. But crumbs, or little sticky dirt, or some kind of leftover residue of dirt that could have been there, even if it came from chametz, we don't care about that. Because Balirah Balamatze is a non-issue when it comes to insignificant things. Shem Evel Eichloi could be a problem if they're going to be using those toys on Pesach and they use those toys with chametz. Yeah, those toys need to be washed and checked, because we are worried of achilas chametz even in insignificant amounts, as we've explained. But if you're not planning to use those toys on Pesach, even if there was chametz in there and remaining crumbs in there, we're not concerned about it, because there's no Balirah Balamatze and there's no Shem Evel Eichloi in those kinds of situations. So those are the basic criteria of how to follow where Bedikas Chametz, where should the effort of Bedikas Chametz should be. Of course, Yisrael Kedoshim Heim, and people that have a lot of energy and a lot of time, maybe very zar mitzvahs, they want to go above and beyond the minimum basic halacha, which requires Bedikas Chametz according to the parameters that we have established. They're welcome to do so if they can do so, if it works out with their family, if it works out with other factors that the person has to worry about, the total peacefulness and issue of anxiety in their home, so then you could do so. But a person has to know what the halacha demands of us and what is considered a chumrah. What a person does, when a person mixes up the chumras versus halacha, that results in problems. Many people ask, now that we know more or less what to check for, so the truth is, we need to know how much time, really, how much time is Bedikas Chametz, how much energy and time do we have to put into Bedikas Chametz LMaaseh? And the problem with that is like this, because LMaaseh, our women today, Baruch Hashem, Nashim Tzadkaniyas, they spend weeks, if not months, cleaning the house before Pesach. And the house is spotless. When it comes to Bedikas Chametz, 95% of the homes are spotless. They've been gone through and over again, and everything is really good. So the question is there still a chiv of Bedikas Chametz? Why should there still be a chiv of Bedikas Chametz? The house has been cleaned and checked. After all, the Mishnah says in the beginning of Pesachim that the chiv of Bedikas Chametz is only makom shemachnisin by chametz, a place where your chametz is used, where chametz has been used. That's what requires a bdika. So I want to ask you just a theoretical question. What would be if this whole year I didn't have any chametz in the specific area in my house? I didn't use my house the whole year for chametz. But last year, before last Pesach, I had a chametz house. But since then, I cleaned it, I went through Pesach, everything was fine. Now I want to use it this year. Is that considered the makom shemachnisin by chametz? Or are you going to say that that's a makom she'em machnisin by chametz because this whole year hasn't been used? But last year was used. In other words, how do you define makom shemachnisin by chametz? Does it have to be used last week, last month, last year, last decade? What is the definition of makom shemachnisin by chametz is not so clear. One could easily argue that even though a month ago this place was full of chametz, but in the last month there hasn't been any chametz over here because we cleaned it, we checked it, we know that it's clean, we locked up that pantry, we locked up that area of the house. No chametz has been in the bedroom since Teva's time. So now it's become a makom she'ein machnisin by chametz because we know there's no chametz in there. So why is there a chiv b'dika? So perhaps we don't have to check most of the house. We only have to check the house where we know that there was chametz until we cleaned. But once we cleaned it, the cleaning should have absolved us from the chiv of chametz. And indeed, this is an argument that some place can make at least as a limud schus for the minig of Rav Ha'olam, that they don't spend too much time in Bedikas Chametz. They look and they check and they make sure that this was clean, that was clean, but they don't go through every little inch over and over again as many Gedolei Yisrael did. And the answer is because a lot of people look at it, we know the houses are clean, the women have told us, they've checked it, they've cleaned it, they spend who knows time and money and energy in making sure that it's chametz free. So it's a makom she'ein machnisin by chametz at this point. And therefore, we don't really have to check it according to the halacha, even though the halacha says that Bedikas Chametz is required. But Bedikas Chametz is only required by makom shemachnisin by chametz, and perhaps this is not a makom shemachnisin by chametz. There's a Shlomo Kluger who says that as long as you know that for the last 3 days no chametz has been brought into this area and it's completely chametz free for 3 days, that's chazkasa badak. Chazaka of 3 days establishes a chazaka. It now becomes a makom she'ein machnisin by chametz, which is not potter from b'dika, which is a huge chiddush lahalacha, which is debated, and many poskim accept it. Many poskim do not accept that, and they say that no, since you know there was chametz there sometime during this past year, a person still needs to check it. But it is a limud schus for the minig of Klal Yisrael who do not spend countless hours making sure that every little area is gone over and over again because they're relying on the fact that this perhaps is considered a makom she'ein machnisin by chametz. And indeed, lahalacha, we know that there's a debate in the poskim, but minig Yisrael to put 10 pieces of chametz in various parts of the house. And some say that's required, some say it's not required. The Ramah says that it's not required because the main mitzvah is to search. You don't have to find. As long as you search, you make the mitzvah and you can recite a bracha on that. But it's possible at least in the opinion of some Pesachim, that nowadays, when the house is Chametz free, and perhaps it's called the Makom She'ein Machnisim by Chametz, perhaps, if so, then there's no Chiv Bedika. If there's no Chiv Bedika, so then it might be a bracha levatala. What are you checking for? If you know that there's no chametz, so what are you checking for? So therefore today it should be min hadin. Every family should make sure to hide some pieces of chametz, 10 or whatever, some pieces of chametz in various corners of the house, and therefore, and the person who is checking should not know where they are. So now it will become at least a makam shemachnisim bechametz. We have brought chametz into the house. Maybe we did so special for the bedika, but at least it's called a makam shemachnisim bechametz. And then a person could easily recite the bracha without going into any shilas whether or not it is a bracha levatala. Alternatively, you could rely on the fact that your car hasn't been cleaned that well, and your car certainly is a makam shemachnisim bechametz. There are other ways of dealing with this issue, but perhaps that's why there was a minig Yisrael to put the crumbs of chametz around the house to make sure that even if the house is expertly cleaned, it should not be called a makam she'ein machnisim by chametz, and therefore it is a makam she'machnisim by chametz. It requires bdika with a bracha, and everybody should continue following their minhagim of bdikas chametz as they have done in the past. And mitzvah Shem shall be for a Pesach which is chametz free, and bring us taka the gula shleim.